Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. So far we have 35 people came today. That's great news. That's fun. And I'm sure some other folks will come on in. So uh, I wanted to kind of give you a little overview of what we're going to do today, so you can anticipate what's going on. I am going to show us, I'm going to do this thing where we're going backwards, right? So from end to beginning, then back the way we came. And my idea was that I wanted to focus a little bit more today on not only how we make a notan, right? Because some folks have problems with that, and that's fine. It's got complications in it, but also how to make, I got something there glittering behind my head, how to apply it, right? How do we use it? So back a while ago now, maybe almost 18 months ago or so, I did a demo similar to this. And I talked about how do you make a notan, and I showed different ways. It was like a very brief synopsis of what we do in a class of mine. But I did have people say that it'd be nice to understand how you apply the notan, and I agree, right? So we're going to start with the finished painting and the notan and talk a little bit about how I apply it, and you can ask questions about how I apply it. And then after we understand the way it's been applied, I'm going to go and make the notan. I'm going to make the notan from scratch. I have an app that I use. You'll see that the app has many benefits, but has limits. That's where your brain and decision making enters into the equation. And we make that notan, and then we're going to make the painting. I have already made part of the painting to speed things along. That's okay. You'll see when we get to it, there's lots for you to still watch. So that's kind of the idea of the demo. In the middle, I'll take a small break, and you'll have a message from your sponsor. That's me. Because I have an upcoming set of classes, and you guys may be interested. And if you're not interested, that's okay. Other folks will be watching this YouTube video, and I'll link to it to the blog. They may watch it there as well. And of course, I'm interested in enrollment. So there'll be a little break in the middle for that, and then we'll hop back into the demo. I want to give you a heads up so you can expect that, right? But that's the whole shebang. We'll see if we can do this in about an hour and a half, but I think it's a little bit of a longer demo. And that's okay. I have that time blocked out for us, and I'm sure we'll have a good time. So if for some reason you have to leave, this will be uploaded. This one I'll be doing for free. I suspect as I go into the future that may be shifting some, that some will be for free and some I'll be asking for some sort of payment as I sort of figure out ways to build this time into my life, which requires dollars to create time. So having said all of that, without further ado, I want to get into the paintings, right? Did anybody have any questions before I jump into all of that? I have the chat box open, and so I'm here to check in with you in case you guys have stuff you want to ask me. I am going to switch over the camera here, and actually I'd like it to be this camera, and nope, we definitely want that. Can I get this to be a little darker? A little bit. It's a little bit light. I do. What I want to do here, and maybe I can adjust this for a low light. Let's see if that
It's
helps.
light at the top, Steve.
It is quite light at the top.
Yeah.
I was just recognizing that. Of course, the best laid plans of mice and men. I actually went through this ahead of time and assessed a number of things, and I did not assess this specific painting, but I did assess a variety of things, so I'm a little bit surprised Sometimes it's just that we need less light in the room. Yeah, that did help a bit, but of course now this is a little bit darker. I understand the problem, but we're going to have to make do for the moment. So I have here the finished painting, and just a moment. So I do something in the background. Okay. So I have here the finished paintings, and these, I have the painting itself, and I have the a supersized notan that I created for this. There we go. At least now they make sense to my brain. So this is a painting that I finished. It was from this earlier spring. Here's my supersized ink painting I did. This is something new that I'm exploring, doing full-sized versions of these things. And when we have the finished painting, I'm often talking to folks about when we make a notan that I call it the hourglass. We have all the values of the original photograph, and it slims down to the funnel. That's the notan. And then, of course, our final painting isn't made up purely of black and white, right? So, and it's not just two colors. So it expands back out and it goes through the hourglass, and we recomplicate things. But we have the guide of the notan now to help us understand how we want to apply our paint. So in this example, it's obvious to me, I chose this example because I felt like it was a clear demonstration of how we can apply a notan, right? We have these darker values, and the darker values are here. The darker values are also here, right? And then we have, these little weeds and flowers coming up that come across everything. But also notice that in here, like the waves that are coming in, and even this little shadow area is in the notan as a darker value. Why? Because what I call the local contrast is darker, right? So I came in first and I applied this yellow to the background. And then you can see down here, I applied this green. It was a big wash. I'm going to show you what it looked like. This is a pretty basic example, right? It's upside down. How about we do it like that? So, of course, sunshine coming on in. So here we have the sky. We have a bit of white for sparkles. It comes on down, and we have the green at the bottom. This is all done in one big wash. Of course, I don't do every painting this way, but this is a simplification of the process. So this version, all of this jazz that is on this painting so far is the whites of my notan, right? And just like I was talking about, we funnel it down in the hourglass and it expands back out. So in the whites, we have all the boldest contrast. We can see the composition, and then I can also see what are the shapes of things I'm going to bond together. I'm looking for lost edges. And also where we need local contrast to read the painting, meaning these waves are coming in. So these waves are in the notan. I need them to stand out from what's behind them, right? And thus, I come in, and even though the waves aren't super dark, they are significant. They're darker than what's around them, and it helps them pop out off the page, right? So we have them in here. They're coming in here, all the little divots that cast shadows and whatnot. So this notan is my guide for the painting process, particularly for wet into wet shapes. Down here in the grasses, as an example, there's all kinds of blades of grass, and they're all just bonded together. I don't need tons of detail. Of course, if you wanted lots of detail, you could do that. You would have a significantly more complex notan, but that's not the way that I paint. So we bring in this simplified shape, boop, and it comes over here, and you can see how these two relate together. And so it helps me find simpler shapes. I'm painting wet into wet. I have a variety of values in this space. It isn't as if it's all one value, right? It's I've come down to the neck of the hourglass, and I'm opening it up back out. So in here we have a variety of values, but they're all darker than what is next in the context of the values. Then, you know, the context of the values is what is important, right? That it's a local contrast. Why not just do a 3-value study? That's a super good question. I saw somebody asking that. So my experience about 3-value study, and do I think 3-value studies are something that's some sort of horrible thing to do? No, I think they're great, right? And a lot of really great painters do 3-value studies. My experience is, I'm going to pop back up here on the screen so that I can talk to you a little bit. My experience is that 3-value studies are very good at helping you understand a sequence of washes, right? Somebody like Andy Evenson does a 3-value study. They're lovely little like mini paintings, right? And they help you see the lights and the middle values and your dark values, and that's how you do it, right? My experience with a lot of students is that the 3-value study is still marginally kind of overly complex, and people end up creating almost renderings in the 3-value study. And the 3-value study, I think, is very good for this process where you are understanding the sequence of the shapes that you're putting in, the washes that you're putting in. But you, I find something like a notan, this guy, as an example, helps us see the composition better because it has fewer values. So we have to simplify more, right? And I often find that once we have a notan that's complete, the experience of applying it, because we have bonded more and more shapes together, we've welded these shapes together, that therefore I find the wet into wet process can also be easier with the notan, right? Because it can be our guide for how we're going to bond these shapes together in the wash. So, so I'm not against 3-value studies, but I find the notan very functional and sort of elevates certain elements of the process. So that's kind of my take on that. I do get asked that question. It's a legit question. I also like making notans. So it's a lot of fun, and they're very useful. So, you know, I know Andy Evenson says, oh, I love making these little 3-value paintings. They're so much fun. That's probably part of why he teaches them. So he enjoys it. So that is part of it too, but it's not the only reason. That's a great question. Okay. I'm going to hide away again here so that you guys can see the paintings again. So, you know, there's not a whole lot to talk about beyond what I'm saying, in my opinion, for this stage, right? Which is just, I'm sure you can see, here's this notan, here's the finished painting. How do they relate? And you're going to see in just a moment that when we go to do the notan, that the tricksy part about notans is, what do you do with the middle values, right? And the tricksy part about applying a notan is, what do you do with the middle values? So that's the part where you have to engage in the process. But I will say, even in a subject like this where we have a middle value for the waves, right? We don't want the waves to be as dark as this rock, nor do we want the waves to be as dark or as richly chromatic as this foreground, because the foreground's super close to us and the waves are receding, right? So all of that is true. But in terms of design, the waves are super important, and they need to be clearly separated from the area next to them. Thus, I have them in the notan, and that's my guide for how I'm applying it in terms of how I think of the design. So before I move aside from this earlier phase, does anybody have any questions about this idea like, okay, I've got a notan and now I want to apply it to my painting. How do I apply it, right? What's the purpose of it? Somebody says, is it ink or watercolor? The notan is ink. So if we do it in watercolor, the problem is that the notan ends up being, it has a variety of values, and we lose that process of simplification. So I'm always pushing students to use a Pentel brush pen, or use a bottle of, like carbon black ink, or to, I have sometimes they'll use like a Sharpie marker, which works okay. It works all right, but it isn't as good as just doing it straight with ink. So that it's definitely with ink. So I see people are asking a number of good questions, and I'm going to answer them as I step into the next step of this little demo, which is that I want to make a notan. And there's a number of steps to this process. And, one of the things that if you go back to the blog post where you found this link, I have a photo there, and the photo has the original reference photo on the left. It has a notan in the middle, and it has a finished painting on the right-hand side. And the goal is for you to understand the sort of it's an hourglass, right? I should have a little reference image with it. Photo on top.
I don't quite understand what you're saying. I'm not sure if you're using a mic. And
you don't understand what I'm saying about what?
Okay.
Hello? She went away. Somebody
Okay.
is.
So
I don't know if they're speaking to me. So let's go over to participants. And mute everybody again.
okay.
Let's see. Just a moment, folks. The epic quest continues as I hunt for the nice person who's speaking. Let's do this a different way. And we're going to come in here, and I'm going to mute you all again. Sorry, folks. Okay. So onwards we go. People had some good questions, and I'll just say my goal is that we can maybe answer some of those questions when we do the, build a notan. So let's go, and I need to grab my tools, and just a moment, folks. I'm in my little studio, and I got to move all the pieces around. All right. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do, there we go. Something funny was happening. And I'm back. Okay. And I want lots of little moving parts for a demo like this. Right? This is from last year's Daily Notan Challenge. And of course, I don't have my Pentel brush pen, but that's okay. We are going to make magic happen. Because what I do have is a bottle of Sumi ink. And a paintbrush, which is really why I'm always telling people why is it worth making a notan with the Pentel brush pen, or with the an actual bottle of ink. and assume we brush with the brush is because this has lots in common with painting because you're using a paintbrush. And if you're doing it on an iPad or you just use an app, you're never really pushing your ability to learn how to paint while you actually make a notan. So let's see if we can answer a few of these questions as I dig in to how to make a notan. And I'm going to need my phone for this too. So who did I learn how to make a notan from? Or does anybody make a notan? So the short answer is I've never taken a class with a person who did a notan. Mitch Albala is a great oil painter and he uses notans. He has a lot of great resources on notans. So he's a person to look up, Mitch Albala, and he has a book and all kinds of great stuff. Chen Chung Wei would have us do simplification tasks, and they were like a notan, and I suspect he knew exactly what he was doing when he was having us do a notan. So he kind of introduced me to this idea of the simplification of your shapes. Then the other question we had here, do I do it before I do a watercolor? I have students do it before we do watercolors for them because they often are having a hard time simplifying their shapes and building a good composition. Since I've done tons and tons and tons of notans, I don't do them all the time before I start. But if I'm having a problem with a painting and I'm going to do it more than once, then I'll do a notan for them. Sometimes I just do notans because I think they're compelling and I don't have the time to do a full painting. And I want to see if I think the subject of the reference photo, if it's worth maybe doing a painting for it, then I'll do a notan for it. So somebody said, let's see. Yes. Do we use the notan to modify reality in the service of design? 100%. Absolutely. So, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. And then let's see, we dig in here. What's the book? So I often use a moleskin just to say, and this is not a moleskin. It's a pentalic sketchbook. And I do have links on the blog post that is about this. And then as the daily notan challenge approaches, then I will be sharing all those links again. But there is a link at the bottom, and it's all about supplies, and it tells you what's the book I use and what about my pen, and you can find all that jazz in there. And it's all like Amazon links or something like. It's not an affiliate link. I haven't started doing that yet, but they're there and they're available for you. So as you can see, these become little art objects. I can spend a long time on something if it's complicated and I'm having a good time. Does it need to be this complicated? No, it doesn't. So I don't paint over these. These are just their own experience. And I learn a lot from these. So let's dig into how do we make the notan. And then once we've made a notan, we're going to use that painting where I made the first wash, and then we're going to apply the notan to the painting itself. So I'm going to jump on with this phone, and actually we might be able to just do it from here. I don't even know if I need to drop into the Zoom call. Sometimes simpler is easier. So I used to do a thing where I would I thought it was very fancy, and it was very fancy. There we go. That's a good spot. I would call into the call from the phone, and then I would, yeah, we're going to do it like this. And then I would actually have it fill the screen, but I just don't think it's that important. This is a little app that I use, and it's called the Notanizer app. Notanizer, right? Like a Terminator, but for notans. And this little app, you load up your photo into the app, and then Once it's in there, you can grab it. Here's the one that we're doing today. You can see the reference. It has a little slider bar, and the slider bar goes more dark or more light, right? That's the gist of how this functions. It actually has things like a 3-value notan, and you can slide 2 things. Here it is going back and forth. It's, I don't know, some few bucks. You can get it on an iPhone, and I believe you can also get it on an Android phone as well. It's, I don't know, $5 or something like that. It's a great tool. So this little Notanizer app, I propose to students that they use because it can kind of get you partway through the process, and it starts helping you see the contrasts better, right? That's what this is all about. So in this example, one of the problems that we have is that when I come in, you can see it's like, of course, I don't want the foreground, in this to be a 100% black. And I also don't want, I want some white in here, right? I want some highlights inside of the foreground. So sometimes when we have middle values that we're trying to turn into a notan so we can understand the design of the reference photo, we are going to have little sections, and each section is going to help us understand, we're going to notanize just that little section until it reads what we want it to read. And then we're going to change the values, and it'll help us see another section. So in this example, here is the foreground. You can see it has little bits of highlights in it. I'm going to make the whole thing darker. Now you can see how the waves and the rock appear. And here, I can see that I should jump in. So we're going to jump in.
Recording in progress.
Yes. Need to. Just a moment. Okay. So, first of all, does anybody have an echo? I'm going to take that as a no, and everybody can still hear me inside of the app, inside of the demo. Yep, great. So, and I want to share my screen. And then you guys are going to see this up on the screen. This will be better. All right. Now, here we are on the Notanizer app. Much better. I should have just started with this. I guess that's how you learn. So here's where I was talking about the foreground. And this is how we really want the foreground to look, right? It doesn't need to be black. It has some local contrast that makes it compelling. But obviously, when we use the Notanizer app, it has problems when we make the grass legible. So instead, when we start pushing the slider over, okay, now we can see the waves, right? There are some little rocks in the foreground in the water. You can see them. And then the other thing to recognize is as these big rocks come into view, look, there's more rocks. But of course, I don't need this painting to be crazy dark so that now I can see all the ripples in the water and all the rocks. So the Notanizer app has limits. People sometimes ask me, well, why don't we just use the Notanizer app? And the truth is, every once in a while you can. Because every once in a while, it actually does what you need it to do. You pop the photo in and you're like, hey, that looks complete to me. And then you learn that, okay, this is a piece of cake. I don't need to make a notan out of it. But that is actually relatively uncommon. So instead, I go into this experience with the Notanizer app to understand it. And it has complications. And then I'm going to use this app to guide me when I make my notan. So I'm hoping you can see the limits of the app, but also how it can help us see um, how we want to approach this painting. So having said that, I think now I am done. All right, we're back. And let's go this beautiful white page. And I'm gonna actually leave it on this little notanizer because I think it's gonna help folks understand how I'm applying things. The actual notan does not need to be super big. Sometimes I make it big because I find it fun. So I make it bigger and I make it into a little art object. I'm looking for my white paint. Come here, white paint. Um, no white paint in here. It is, I just got back from a paint out. So, my life is topsy-turvy right now. We'll make it work. Here is the ink. So I'm gonna start at the top and I'm gonna move the Notanizer app to where I think, okay, now the rocks appear. That's what we need them to do. So right now we're at the beginning of the funnel, right? And if we go to my photos, there's the little baby reference photo. Nothing particularly fancy. That's okay. I just want to show you that, hey, look, there's like a variety of values. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate with that little itsy bitsy photo. So we need to translate that into a design pattern. The rock comes across. That's the edge of my paper there. And the bottom of the rock has like little pieces. When I share the YouTube video for this, I will also share the reference photo. So if you're pondering working on this, I can give that to you and then you can try it out on your own. Okay. And so there's these little rocks. They are, we're funneling everything down into the neck of the hourglass. And there are little reflections in the water, just like there were in my little notan and just like there are in the painting. And we have a variety of waves. Note also how as the waves come in, they turn kind of on a dial, right? As they go away, the perspective becomes flatter and flatter as they mimic the horizon. And that is part of the charm of this little subject. So a lot, and then of course, these are sort of pointing like arrows towards the rocks here in the midground. So that's part of why I like this little composition. And there are some rocks here. They're a little closer. And there's like a breaking wave here. It's more of a flurry of little wavelets. And there's even a little something in here in the background. Now, it's not a science, it's an art. So as folks ask sometimes, well, how do I find the horizon? Or, I mean, you do what you got to do. This is just an aid to help you. So in goes the foreground, right? I'm going to scoot over the Notanizer app. You're like, oh, there's all those blades of grass. And I am simplifying this down. I just want to express the idea of the blades of grass. And this is going to help me later bond my shapes together so that I can paint more compelling wet into wet shapes, and I can let some stuff go because I'm making some of my decisions now about how to simplify things and bond my shapes together. So in this goes. It's got a little bit of sunlight on it, right? Now I can massage the edges of things. Just a moment. Um, I'm glad to hear that, Catherine. Catherine says that they want to go to Mendocino, but they were in Morro Bay. I'm sure it was a real burden to be in Morro Bay. um, I don't normally carry my ink with me. What I carry with me is my Pentel brush pen, which I can't find. Um, where are you? I had it yesterday. So no, I carry a little Pentel brush pen, which looks something like a Sharpie. And it has bristly tips that come to a nice point, but it has a cartridge that goes into it. So if we have a very small break in the middle for 1 or 2 minutes during this demo, then I can go and grab it. It might be inside the house. So now that I have the grass and I can, get little grass-like blades and I can try and communicate the grassiness of things. This comes in. Okay. Now I can also do these little super cute little grass stalks. And they come up through the design. They help connect a lot of things together. They connect the bottom to these horizontal bars so that it's not all so separated. And it kind of helps you climb a ladder up into the design by connecting these shapes. So if I was going to reduce this to the most basic of shapes, just as an example, I would say we have the bottom of the painting, and it's really a backwards L now because we've added in these grass stalks. And then I would say we have this guy comes across, right? And we have 1, 2, 3. That is basically the whole design of the painting, as in terms of the most basic of shapes. And this is something we'll be going over in the shapes class on Saturday. We're going to be building things out with black and white paper and just understanding shapes and how we guide the eye through the painting. So here we have this very simplified notan, right? And the goal is to take this notan and apply it to the painting process. So let me close this up before I have a real disaster. And let's take that away. So we're at this spot where I call it the neck of the hourglass, right? And we are simplifying things down to sort of the nuts and bolts. And I'm going to zoom back out to where we need to be to paint. There we go. And now that I have this, it is as simplified as it's going to get. And we can begin to sort of recomplicate it when I go to the application process. So right now, everything that we've got is either black or it's white. And we can see the patterns, how I want to go through the painting, how the waves guide my eye into these little islands, how the grass blades help connect the foreground into, it's like a ladder that I can climb up into the waves so that I can go laterally and I can circulate through the painting. So one of the things that the notan does is it helps us simplify and build a composition. So what do we want to change? What are we going to simplify to make it easier to read? That kind of stuff. And once we have the notan, then we've built our composition. We've taken some things out and simplified some things. We've bonded some shapes together so that we can have an interesting, smushy, beautiful wet into wet experience in our watercolor, right? Or our oil painting. It's all pretty media agnostic. It helps you bond your shapes together and simplify things. Now, when we go to paint, this can be the guide for how we're going to apply things in the next phase. So let me see here. Ooh, I see. It says keep trying. Let's see. All right, this goes away. Whoop. So when we go back to this giant notan, right? Here's the giant notan. We're going to be applying this giant notan to this, not to this, whoop, to this. So, right, you can see even this phase, and it's a great question. I'll get to that in a moment. So even in this phase, we have what is on here 100% white. That's the first wash, right? And it could be a couple washes. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. It could be a couple washes if you want it to be more subtle or whatever the case might be. My goal is to try and simplify it more and more and more. And I find that often helps the eye travel through the painting more. But I totally have things I do when I do more than one wash. But even when I do more than one wash, I'm thinking, okay, it's all part of it's all the white, right? So we've funneled it down the hourglass, and now we're opening it back up on the bottom of the hourglass. And when we open it back up, I just want to note, even this has a variety of values, right? In here, I preserved the white, and I didn't just make everything black except for this white, right? This glitter. So the glitter on the water, the sparkle on the water comes out, and around it, it's still a very pale value. So I've opened up the values, but this is all part of the initial wash. It's what I'm preserving of the paper, and then it's the palest values that go all around it. Both of those things in this example are part of the white. When we go in to do our darks now, we did our first wash, everything's totally complete. The darks themselves also are going to have a variety of value. We're going to open it back up, but the local contrast is going to always separate it from where we're at. So there will be areas where we're going to put in a middle value, but in that spot, it should still really separate from the area next to it, right? That's what we talk about. That's why I made up this term local contrast to describe this experience. So somebody asked here, do I use masking fluid? I don't. I like 1 out of every 100 paintings, I try out masking fluid for fun, but I don't generally use masking fluid. On this experience, I just used dry brushwork. And since I figured this isn't a demo about wet into wet painting per se, and I knew we had to do all this lead up where we're exploring what do we do with a notan, and then how do we make a notan, and then applying it, I wanted to be able, finish a painting with you guys. So I did this first, but I didn't use any masking fluid. And is it a fact that you got to bond all your shapes together? I would never say anything is a fact that you have to do with art, right? That seems faulty to me. But, my experience is that when I am, you can see I got this stamped from the from Mopo, right? From the Mendocino paint out that I was just at last week. But so I believe it's Ishak. So Ishak, you were asking, Is it a fact that you need to bond all your shapes across the foreground, the middle ground, and the background? And the short answer to that is no. No, you don't have to do that. Um, but my experience is that with many students that I'm working with, they want to paint really complex paintings, and it's like, you gotta crawl before you can walk, and you gotta walk before you can run. And so I just think um, I'm always trying to help them do interesting and compelling paintings that aren't astoundingly difficult or that have really complex design problems that you need to resolve to make it interesting. So I will say when I am doing landscape painting, demos and things like that, do I think in general bonding your shapes together produces a more compelling subject? Yes, I do. And I think that's reflected by the type of painters that I've liked and studied with. I think it's something that they all did. And I think it's something that they all um, taught either accidentally or on purpose. So I'm talking about folks like Joseph Zbukvich and Alvaro Castanet and Herman Peckel and Chen Chung Wei, right? And the list is long from all these different folks about who were doing landscape painting and what did I get from them. So they were generally bonding their shapes together, first of all, number one. And number two, they Joseph would call it, he didn't call it chutes and ladders. That would have been too clever. I thought, you missed an opportunity, Jay-Z. So, but he would talk about having ladders to climb up, or slides, maybe it was something like that. Anyways, the goal was that you wanted to be able to move through a painting. And when you started working on a painting and it it was like bands, different areas, and they weren't necessarily interacting with each other, that can become kind of boring. And you don't, you kind of look at the painting once and you get from the painting what it had to offer. It's not offering anything else of particular interest. You see all the shapes, there's nowhere to kind of move through the painting. And since you can't really move through the painting, it doesn't stay dynamic. So alternatively, my experience is that um, having paths of transit where you can move through the design keeps you kind of traveling through it. You have different areas that have like alternative additional points of interest, and then you have little traveling edges and they connect you to something else. And it's not like, you know, bricks, one brick, two brick, three brick, and they never really connect. So I'm all about connecting foreground and the midground and all of that. Yes, I would say foreground, midground, that kind of experience, that is definitely thinking of it as a landscape painting. But even if we're just thinking about it in abstract terms, we're thinking about shapes, and it's not about foreground and middle ground, and it's just shapes in a picture plane. Like even the shapes, you want to connect them, right? You want to have a way to move through your abstract. And so even when we're thinking about a composition, that's still really important to me. Um, just a moment. I'm on the hunt for my spritzer. There she is. Um, so as I have been prepping here, I'm sure you guys saw, I wet the back of my paper, and I like to do a very gentle mist on the front. When you wet the back of the paper, it soaks up into the paper and it is like a sponge. The paper does have some thickness to it. I use 140 pound. This is a Saunders Waterford, I think. But I also have used La Naquarelle, and I've also used Arches Rough. I always generally use rough if I can. I prefer rough. But as long as they're all 140 cotton, that's totally fine with me. So I wet the back soaks up the water, the back expands, and the front is still totally dry. And as it expands, it curls. So if you gently mist, you stick it to the board and it stays on the board with water I always do this with water tension. There's no tape. So it's just staying on the board with water tension. Of course, if I'm painting plein air and there's a wind, it'll, as it dries, you'll have problems. But I it sticks to the board with water tension, and then I mist the front, and it sort of regulates the water between the front and the back just a little bit. Pardon me. I'm trying to get this to be tight for the painting process. It was a little loose. There we go. Do I think that those little like paths of transit, the way, these little ladders and slides and chutes and ladders, do they take you to the main point of interest? Yes, definitely. They do that. They do that here too. But I don't think everything has to be like a bullseye where you have like a single point of interest and everything's like rays of light shooting into that one spot. Sometimes it is, but I don't think it has to be like that. You can definitely have paintings with multiple points of interest. You have something that's more commanding, and then you have something that's a secondary, auxiliary point of interest, and it's got extra texture there, or extra something chromatic and vibrant. And so that's an additional point that's compelling to you, and that's okay, right? You can go back to that, and as long as you have a way to go back up to other parts of the painting where you're not trapped, then I think it's totally a-okay. So, all right, let's rock and roll. Yes, Chen Cheng Wei and diagonals. I mean, right? I learned from Chen Cheng Wei too. So he's great. As I've taught over the years, he had something like 10 rules. And I just felt like in the end, it was too many. It was too many. People couldn't remember them. So I've been trying to shrink it down to the most basic design principles. But of course, it's a giant process that's very sophisticated. So I'm setting things up. I got the finished piece here, and yeah, it's gonna have to be the way it is. So yes, the 10 rule. 6 big ones and 4 little ones, or I don't know. He had a lot of stuff to remember, but he knew what he was doing. Ain't no doubt about that. So let's paint a little bit here. It's been just under an hour that I've been working, and I want to sort of apply this notan to the painting process. So I'm just mixing up burnt sienna and ultramarine blue at the moment. It's nothing super fancy. And I'm going to grab some cad orange as well. So when we wet the back, one of the things that it does is it lets us paint for a long time. And stuff never really dries. It does dry, but it takes a long time to dry. And so for a little demo like this, it'll stay wet for the whole demo. Sometimes it'll start to dry and it'll peel a bit on the sides, and I'll lift it up and I'll spray the back. So just like usual, I much prefer, and I'm sure you've heard such a thing from others about composition. It's good, just like photography. When things exit the picture plane and they're bigger than the picture plane, it often makes it feel like there's more out there, and you want to get a sense. You feel like, oh, there's more to be looked at, and I can't see it all. It's very compelling and interesting to me. So I like to have things exit the picture plane. And so I'm putting in this sort of basic shape. This is this big island. And just like I was saying before, this the notan helps us see how we're going to apply our wet into wet shapes. So, but within the wet into wet shape, we can open up the values, right? We've passed through the neck of the hourglass. The neck of the hourglass is the notan. We've simplified everything down to the simplest shapes we could find, black and white. And now we're going to open them back up and we're going to recomplicate them, but that's going to be our guide about the wet into wet process. Um, does the wet into, people are asking about wetting the back. Does it help? Yes, can, when you're doing plein air. But sometimes you can't do it when you're doing it plein air. Why? Because it can be windy. So I think it might be time for me to do another, what did I learn when I went to paint plein air post? I've done these in the past, but it's been a couple years since I've done one. And plein air has its own set of problems, right? And they can affect the logistics of painting. They don't just provide you things to paint, it can make things difficult. So you end up having to paint differently sometimes. So in the studio, I can wet this back, and if I do a really thorough job, it can stay wet for up to an hour or 45 minutes, long time. And if I when I wet the back and then I paint on the front, it's like two sides of a sponge coming together and meeting. So the moisture that's on the back side of the sponge meets the moisture on the front side of the sponge, and it stays wet for a long time. So when I went and painted, if you guys have been following me online, then you saw some of the paintings that I did this last week. And for example, so I'm mixing up, by the way, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It's actually a warm gray, but it's thick. This is a thicker version. This version was moving a little bit. It was watery. It was like a milk or a tea. This version doesn't move at all. It's a little thicker. So why am I doing that? Because now I can paint wet into wet into this rock. And right, I'm opening it up through the funnel. This rock is very obviously much darker than everything around it, but within the rock itself, we can still have a variety of values, and I can paint wet into wet. Have a lovely time doing it, right? And as this rock dries, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to paint these other rocks. I'm going to let this dry for a tiny little bit. I'm going to bring over the notan, and I'm to help cue us so you guys can remember what we were doing. Notan, there he is. All right, there's the notan. So we have a rock in it. Notice that we have this reflection of the shadow of the rock goes down into the water. We're going to need to paint that and the waves. So what I'm going to do is paint the rock, this other rock, they're going to bond together. I'm going to simplify my shapes. I'm going to give up some detail to have some softness and some connection between things. And then I'm going to paint these little shapes. And then I'm going to paint the waves. And then as this slowly dries, I can come in here. I'm going to paint the foreground at the bottom. And then I'm going to connect it with that ladder that shoots back up. And by the time we get back up to these little wavelets and stuff, they should mostly be dry. And I can paint through them, and I'm not going to have a total mess. So that's kind of the process I'm going to use to apply the notan when we're doing it in here. But the most important part is this idea of connecting these shapes, and these are all the darker values in the notan. They're the darker values also here, and they're also all bonded together wet into wet. All right. Um, well, last spring, I installed a little portable AC unit. It's not portable, but it's a mini AC unit in here. And today, I am glad that I did so because it's like 90 degrees outside, 5 feet away from me, and in here it's 70. So that's great. I'm very glad for that while I sit here with you guys. I'm going to make this, I'm going to grab a little more cad orange. There we go. And I'm going to drop this in. So in typical Steve-ish fashion, in my excitement to paint and talk about Notans, I forgot to talk about my class. So as I paint here for a moment, I'm just going to bring it up. We're kind of in the middle of the demo anyways. Um, so I am going to be teaching a series of one-day classes. And the first two of those classes are this coming weekend. And the first one will be on composition. It's going to be about abstracts. We're going to be building actually shapes out of black and white construction paper. This is a really interesting and can be an interesting mind-opening experience for certain painters. Bernie was in the class where we did this last. And there's lots to learn from it because we kind of gets us past thinking about objects. Objects are rocks, objects are grass. And it just starts thinking, helps us think about shapes, right? One shape, two shape, three shape, diagonals, connecting shapes. And that can be super powerful for helping us improve our ability to see the shapes of our painting, even if they're obviously all objects. I understand that. But there are actually shapes on the paper, of course, and that helps us build more compelling compositions where we want to, where it captures our vision and it's moving us through the painting and not stuck in a single spot. And we have some expectation of why, we are deliberately moving through the painting with purpose rather than being just sort of at the whims of whatever reference photo we happen to pick. So do I let the background totally dry before I paint the other objects, the other shapes? Absolutely. The end. Yes. So yes, Ksenia, the background has to be dry or this next wash will have soft edges. And then really, to me, if you were to paint these rocks before the background was dry, what does that really mean? It really means it's part of the first wash. It just means now you're painting wet into wet still. It's still part of the first wash. You're going to have soft edges everywhere, right? So that's totally it. That's another part of the classes I'll be teaching is wet into wet painting. Yes, there's lots to learn about controlling your water when you're doing a wet into wet painting, but that'll be at the beginning of November. So I have the first class on Saturday. It is all about composition and shapes and moving the eye through the painting and diagonals. And right, we're going to do abstract shapes and we're going to look at some masters and explore a lot of that. On Sunday, we're going to do notans. It's all about notans. And it's like today, but on steroids. So we're going to do a lot of notans. We're going to have breakout rooms. It's a lab for you guys. I have a bunch of reference photos. We're going to do stuff from some masterworks. And it should be really helpful if you've been wanting to do more with notans but have been intimidated by it, or you're looking to apply things to participate and get sort of ready for the October Notan Challenge. Additionally, at the end of the month, after the October Notan Challenge, I am offering 2 more classes, and they are all about basically this part of the design process. It's all about what do you do after you've got your Notan, and that is all about wet into wet painting, and then we can really get into how do I control wet into wet painting? How do I control the consistency of my water? And, how do I get softer edges where I can combine and work within the shape to get a variety of shapes and values inside of these, different shapes. And then the final class is going to be a class on color. And it is just what you think. It's all about how do I control my color mixing and to have a repeatable way, a process of mixing color, and then also trying to apply color for effect right? Like, how do we really start combining colors for interest? And you can either buy each one individually. They're all solo classes if you want it to be that way, or you can buy them as a group, all four, and you get it's a discount. I think it's like almost 20%. You get $100 off total. So enrollment is open for those, and you can find it on my website underneath the Learn tab. If you go to Zoom workshops, then you can see everything there, and you can actually enroll. And enrollment is currently open. And I'm just bringing this up because enrollment closes on Thursday at midnight, at the end of Thursday. So I want to get a sense of student numbers, and I need to stop it early enough that I can understand who's participating and how many folks are there. So that'll be wrapping up at enrollment will be wrapping up at the end of Thursday. So, and it's currently available. You can go to the website now and enroll. So I just want to kind of give folks a sense of that. If you are live now, you can ask questions. And if you're watching the video later, then that's great. It's still available for you to go and enroll. Somebody else asks, with the back damp, does it make the front wet? Totally not. This is totally dry. How do we know that? Because of the edges that we're viewing. If this front wasn't dry, this would all be soft edges and they would be exploding into the rest of the paper. If it is a dry edge, I get a hard, crisp edge. That means the front is totally dry. That's the magic. Here you can see it's like bleeding a little bit right on the edge. That's because the water likes to curl around the edges of the paper. Somebody else asked, are the recordings available for classes? Yeah, like if you enroll, do you get to view the recording of the class? Yes, for a limited time. It's like a month that you can have access to the recording, and then I take it down. But yes, so if, I understand sometimes folks got to leave. Sometimes they're reviewing it after, next week, and they're like, what did he say? That's what you have the recording for. All right, let's rock and roll. So just like in the Notan, I have to have a shadow. I have to have a cast shadow here underneath this rock. And it's even the same here. I have this cast shadow underneath the rock as well. It's more sophisticated, but it's the same idea. And here are all the waves. So I'm going to put the cast shadow and the waves in now. And they are not going to be brown, but they will be, and they're not going to be as dark as the rocks, but they will be darker. The local contrast means that they'll be darker than everything around them. So I'm using this as a fun little Sumi ink painting brush. I am deliberately bumping up against this little rock so it can bleed into it. So I'm using this blue. It's a cobalt blue mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna just to mute it a little bit. And part of the reason this cobalt blue is not making a green is because I have painted my background with an orange and not a yellow. So, right, that would definitely be something that we could cover in the colors class as an example after the October Notan challenge wraps up. But yes, that is that's on purpose. That's like a little trick. If I had done this very yellow, like very yellow underneath it, we would be making a green ocean, and that can be a problem. So there are limitations to the medium because this isn't a transparent medium, right? Most of the time it's transparent. And so that'll affect things. Okay. Here, the waves in the distance become flat as they recede and to the horizon. And then as they approach us, here I'm going to connect this to the rocks. While I was chit-chatting, I was sneakily letting things dry just a little tiny bit so that they don't explode into my waves. They're still going to bond to it. You can see how they're bonding to it, but they're just very gently moving into the waves. So, and of course, these waves are not as dark as the rock. And they're definitely not going to be as dark as this grass in the foreground. But they are, the contextual contrast is strong enough that they are very obviously not the same value as what's behind them. Put a little bit of quinacridone rose in here because a purple wave sounds pleasing to me. And the truth is, for this, it's not about color. I mean, it can be about color. Of course, it's also about color. But for this demo, when we're applying the notan, it's really also about value. So I can play with, there we go, the color a little bit. So what does the wetting the back do if it doesn't affect the front? What that does is it slows down the drying process. I like to think of it as like taking a rubber band, and if you don't wet the band, the rubber band is this long, and that's how long it takes to, you stretch it a little bit and then it dries out and it goes back to its normal shape. But when I wet the back, I can stretch it out really far. There we go. And then the drying process becomes way longer to get it back to its original dry shape. So it just lets me slow things down a lot. And that lets me paint wet into wet for 45 minutes and not fret about my shapes drying too quickly. And that lets me have more complex shapes that I want to build, and I don't have to worry so much about them drying out too quickly. So you might have missed that earlier on. We were talking about that some. Okay. So here I am building my wave, right? I'm trying to get them to very gently turn as they're coming in. And as an example, if I decide I don't, it doesn't have to all be hard edges. So as an example here, I'm cleaning my brush, and I'm gonna take clean water and I'm going to soften this edge. There we go. Right? I'm just letting it sort of spill into the area underneath it. And I'm going to do it a little bit in here too, just so you get a sense. I can control my edges. I get to decide where I want hard edges and where I want them to be soft. Bob that up just a little. So somebody asked, what is the yellow under here? It is not a yellow. It is an orange. So I used cad yellow with some cad orange and a little bit of burnt sienna, and I mixed it up ahead of time. And that is what this wash was made from when we started. So, oh, you know what I forgot? I need to put the rocks in. You have some rocks here in the foreground. And I like them because they kind of activate this space a little bit. I feel like without the rocks here, it just feels very empty. It's a big empty bay. So it's kind of like a small additional point of interest because it's this dark hue. It's a small additional point of interest in the bay itself. And I like that. So I want the eye to have other spaces that it wants to take a moment to look at. Right? Just sort of like, oh, there's more in here. Now they're a little lonely right now. We need to put some water around them so they have a context for the story, but they're in here now. All right. So just to reiterate with the yellow versus orange. So, all right, when we're talking about color theory, if I put yellow underneath this blue and I put the blue down, I'm going to get a kind of green. But because I put an orange underneath it, those are mixing complements. So they end up making more of a muted blue. So I can do it on top and not have to fret so much. So just like with the rocks earlier, I am going to mix up a blue with a little bit of burnt sienna in it. It's dark. It's a dark blue. Now I can come in here and I can, if I want to say like the underbelly of this wave is maybe a little bit darker, I can drop it in here and I can paint a little bit wet into wet. And it's all fine. It's all still darker. It's just adding a tiny bit of nuance. And in fact, if I want to go back into these rock shapes, just to say, and I mix up ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, I have a little brush, so it carries only a small amount of water, and I have a not very wet mixture. Now I can come in here and I can also still paint wet into wet. Maybe I want to make a tiny bit clearer this rock edge. So I can come in and paint it with this thicker application of paint and a smaller brush delivering less water. And that's going to help me control that. All right. And even in here, if I want to take that earlier mixture, I had a mix that was cobalt blue with a tiny bit of burnt sienna. So it made a very dark, almost like a Prussian blue. I can come in here. Woo, that's more than I wanted. That's okay. I was trying to get a little variety in the water, right? But that was a little bluer than I wanted. What I'm going to do is take water in here, just clean water, cleanish water, and I'm painting wet into wet with the water. My goal is just to lift that blue out a little bit. Okay. So I want to continue down in here to make the water around here. This is going to slowly start drying, and then I can paint the foreground, and we're going to make these shoots go up, and it'll be almost done. Now this is just starting to bubble up here. So it is lifting from the back. It's just starting to dry. So I can take my spritzer or I could take a brush. Sometimes when I'm starting a painting and I'm going to be working on my own for quite a while, I'll actually do this much earlier in the process, and I'm actually just sort of fully saturating the back of the paper to the best of my ability. And I press it down. I'm not spritzing the front, but what I am going to do is very gently with dry hands press this down so that water tension is holding it against the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I didn't make this up, so I'll give credit to Herman Peckel. Herman demonstrated something very similar to this process. He had his own way of doing it, but it was very similar and totally changed the way I painted. So thank you, Herman. It just let me be much more ambitious with my shapes. I didn't have to worry about things drying so early. All right, I am filling up my water bottle, my little baby plein air water bottle. And I'm going to paint this water, and we're going to move down into the grass. I'm going to get a little bit of, there we go, just a little variety in there. Okay. That is a little darker than I want it to be. I want it to be a middle value. And it's okay with me if it hits the rocks, right? This is like when the waves are bumping up against these rocks and turning into that little sort of shattered glass look that we get in a bay. Okay. I want to control, getting lazy there. I want to control a few of these edges. So what I'm going to do Gotta think of an answer for that little mistake. There you go. Time for a wave there. There we go. Is I'm gonna mute us for just a moment and I'm gonna blow dry this section because I don't want this grass. I want to save the edge of the grass over the top of these waves, and then I can do the top. So I'm going to hit mute for a moment. I'm going to blow dry that, and we're going to do the foreground, and it'll come on up. So let me hit mute. All right, we're back. So let's do the front. And I'm going to show you the notan again. All right, so here was the little notan that I made. And here's where we're at with this process, right? So you can see how the notan is guiding these darker values, even when the darker values have a variety of values inside of themselves. They're all, the local contrast is darker than everything else. And the notan is helping me see, what do I do first and what do I do second, right? What shapes am I gonna let connect to help them be simplified? Yes, as Jacques was asking, after the back is all done, after I've done the background and the midground, that's what I would describe these tunes. This idea of this distance to me is really the background, and I guess I consider this a complex midground. And then he was asking, okay, after that, then I blow dry it to separate the foreground shapes. Well, the short answer for this painting is definitely yes. The long answer in general is I guess it depends. Right? Sometimes we're connecting it, like the midground is this and it's a meadow at the bottom. Wow, then all the shapes combine, right? And I don't need to blow them separate to, you know, do my darks because they're all connected. In this example, I have a shift in hue. This is going to be a dark green and these waves are blue. And so I want to help separate the color as well as the edges. So I have actually blown it dry for that reason, but I wouldn't call it a rule. I think it depends on the subject and the story that you're telling with the subject. I'm just sort of testing that. I'd like it to be a little darker. So what I'm going to do here is basically paint up to the edge. And I'm going to let some of this green pop through. And the vibrant sort of chartreuse green. And I'm gonna haphazardly create a broken edge. I definitely don't want to do a big straight edge because there's nothing about the story of this shape that has a big hard edge. If you make a big hard edge here, it's going to look weird. So we want a broken edge. And I'm just allowing for there to be a bit of light in this subject. I'm, of course, priming this area to paint it, to have a little wet into wet experience in this foreground. And over here, we have this little section that's like a little bit of light is captured in it. So I'm mixing together ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and then I'm dropping a bit of cad yellow. Sometimes I like to do a little cobalt turquoise light. I like that color. So in this goes. And Once I have this kind of broken experience of like a little, it's a very active foreground. Now I can play wet into wet and I can become a little bit more sophisticated. So there we go. So I have the very basic idea of this very simple foreground. Um, Now that I have it here, we can begin to play just a little bit with the foreground. I don't want to overstate it um, for this little demo, but just to sort of show us what's it like if we're working um, wet into wet, and what would be the sequence that I would do to go through things. So once again, got cad yellow, ultramarine blue. I want it to be a dark. Sometimes I'll use, this is like perylene green, so it's a very dark green. So what I can do here, now that I have this shape, I can now make more complicated the edge. I can have little grass blades, right? I can grab some orange to maybe make my green a little ruddy, right? Sometimes it'll be a little ruddy. It'll mix one color into another. These will be little ways for me to travel up into other parts of the painting. I'm just stacking values, helping me create. It's of course partly about story. It's partly about the story of these little grasses and whatnot. But it's also the story of these weaving two shapes, two areas together. So that's partly what I like about including the grasses. I'm going to tilt this a tiny bit. To let it run. Boop. And I'm just, now I can say, well, I don't want this one. I'll keep that one, right? Over here, I have, like a little guy here. And then in here, it's going to be those stalks. So within the body of the grassy area, I can mix up a dark ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I can drop a little bit of green into it, just a little green. But I want it quite dark. This will be, I'm going to be painting within the shape again, right? So in goes these darker darks. I'm just helping tell the story of the recession of distance, and also that this is not flat, that it has nuance within it to tell the story of the grass. I don't need to overstate it so much, but I just want it to be grass-ish. Okay. And I'm doing little splatters, tilting my brush away from the sky so that I don't splatter it into the sky. And I'm mixing up ultramarine blue and burnt sienna again. And over here, it's, ooh, not that blue. There we go. This is a dark area. And I'm prepping it because I'm going to go up into these grass blades and I want a little bit of value. Going to gently spritz it. Let it run a little bit. And away go these little grass blades. What I'm going to do for these little grass blades, I'm going to pull this up a little bit, is I'm going to create the top like here. And now I don't, rather than making the grass blade go somewhere and not knowing where it's going to end up, which is a bummer, now I can descend into this mayhem down below, and it all makes sense because I knew when I started that at the very least I was going to end up, I was starting at the correct spot here on the flower. So I say this with years of experience of accidentally making grass blades go in the wrong spot, and then you think, well, damn, that wasn't what I intended. Um, so like I can drop one in here. I'm going to drop another one in here. Now I can come in and I can connect them. And I know that I'm going to hit my target because I have started with the bullseye and I am shooting the arrow back into my bow from the bullseye. Yes, that's very helpful. Little leaves and things on these little oddball plants that you get right along the perimeter of the ocean. Well, it's not the Mona Lisa, but you get the idea for this painting. I'm all right with it. It's been fun. Um, Once again, now from here, at the minimum, I know I'm going to hit my target for those. Now, once I have this in, if I want to carve out highlights again, I can do that just to say, right? I can do it in a couple ways. I could scratch them out. It's a little early for this, but I want to show you it. Um, and so, maybe we have little grasses. You can see it's a little early. That's okay. I can also like go back in with a very pale value on top. So for example, I have here the cad yellow and cad lemon and cobalt turquoise. And this is a very vibrant, very pale value. So if I wanted to come in here and, drop in, can you see? Yeah, there it is. Little highlights. I can do that. Wet into wet. And this little highlight is actually like a white from the Notan. So these are contextually kind of quite pale, but I want them in the painting for variety and contrast. So I'm just going to drop a few of them in. And it starts to just create a little bit of density in the painting. But I get to drop these in where I want them to go. Um, and now I'm just playing for the fun of it. So let me drop this painting back down. There we go. And I'll put it there. So if I was to bring back the notan, right? Here's the notan. The notan helps us find the basic shapes and to create a composition that we find compelling. But then also the notan helps us see what's going to be the whites of the painting, right? What's the first wash? And then what are going to be the darks? And how am I going to let myself bond my shapes together? So it's a lot of the time when I have students who are having a hard time painting wet into wet, they see so many objects, not shapes. They see so many objects and it becomes you become entranced by the objects and all of the detail of the objects. So sometimes this can be a helpful way to make sense of how to simplify your shapes and paint a little bit more wet into wet, right? That could be one of the clear benefits of doing a notan because it helps you bond everything together just a little bit more. So the truth is, it's very rare that a student is like, boy, I bonded too much stuff together. And now I wish I had more detail and stuff. I mean, yes, you can have that happen, but most of the time what you get is it's full of lots of sort of finicky, finicky little details. And after they're done, there's like no magic left in the painting and they're trying to figure out why. And it's because they've filled it all in for you. right? They gave you all the backstory and you wish they had left some of it to your imagination. Somebody asked what kind of brushes I was using for the grasses. So this is just a normal little Escoda. It's an Escoda and it's a Perla. It's a 6, so it's pretty small. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick, but they make them smaller. And then this is a Chinese brush pen. So that I just got off of Etsy. Um, yes, Wendy, it is like doing calligraphy, which I love doing. I could paint that stuff all day long, and that's probably partly why I make paintings that feature grasses, because I just get a blast out of doing it. The real secret for the grasses is to get that pinky finger down, because that lets me control how hard I'm pressing with the grasses. It's very difficult to just zoom all over the place and actually keep it just glancing on the paper. That can be quite hard. So something to ponder. I want to look over the notes for a moment just to see if people had other questions that I might have missed. The basic shape or the idea is totally from the note. Yes, that is correct. The basic shape comes from the notan. And when in like the composition class, we're definitely the goal for the composition class is to get our minds even more earlier in the process. So it's to get us past objects and start thinking of just purely shapes. How do we make a composition that guides our eye through the picture frame and not be thinking about a seascape, just be thinking about shapes? Then we can start to really make progress when we start talking about notans and simplifying the notans. So, but yes, the short answer is the notan is guiding the composition. It's guiding the shapes. What's the angle that I paint on? I often start flat because it lets me moderate the moisture level very easily. And then if I'm tilting it, I don't know, what is that, 20 degrees? It's not much, right? Like that. This is being flat. You know, it's not a lot. It's just a little to help it move. If I really want something to move, then yes, you know, I'll be painting at 45 or 60 degrees, but then it's really trucking. That's the purpose, is that you want it to move. So I'm very thoughtful about painting at that much of an angle because it has to be on purpose, right? Otherwise, it's really hard to control things. Ashek asks, the foreground wet on wet painting was just based on its own dampness, no wet in the back. Well, it is still wet in the back. How do I know it's still wet in the back? Because the paper's not falling off the board. So, no, it's totally still wet on the back. Remember when I pulled the paper up and I just slightly spritzed it? That was kind of like re-energizing the moisture inside the sponge of this. So I probably could go away for another 45 minutes and it would still be a little bit wet. Yes, long time. The board is a 1/2 inch gator board. So, right, just like the thickness of a finger, something like that. And I use gator board so it has a hard cuticle. Right, you can actually see the edges a little bit. This is the foam part in the middle. You can buy them in big sheets and cut them down, or you can just buy them in smaller shapes. These are great, super duper light, and long lasting. They're great. You're welcome, Wendy. I'm glad you could make it. And then Ishaka, great questions, everybody. It is 1:45, so not bad for such a complex demo. But I hope for folks this explained a little bit what I'm going through when not only how do I make a notan and how do we take it from a photo to a notan and how we're simplifying things, but also what do I do with a notan when I want to apply it, right? How is it guiding my painting process once I'm done? So part of it is totally about composition, and definitely part of it after you've made the notan is really about wet into wet and bonding your shapes together and helping you simplify things so that you're not captured by so many details. Yes, once again, somebody was talking just a little bit about the classes. And if you go to my website, I have a new tab up in the navigation bar, it says Learn. And if you click on there, I have a bunch of the free stuff that's all in the art toolbox. And then I also have a thing that's all about the upcoming Zoom classes. So it's been a pleasure, and it's been quite a long time in between demos. And yeah, so I really appreciate everybody being here and giving me your time. I know some of you, it's very late, right? If you're in Europe and you're farther east, it's even later. So I particularly appreciate that. And I know everybody else here, you gave me your lunch break, and thank you very much. I am going to sign off, and I will post this to the website. I'll put it up on YouTube, and then I'll post it in a blog post, and everybody should get it if you want to read it over. It'll be available for you to check it out one more time. Um, yes, eventually the Mendocino pet will go up. Website will, yes, is a short answer. I'll be doing stuff on the website that'll show you the Mendocino photos. So, that's it. Sayonara, folks. Until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.